Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete.
Hi, Keith.
Well, we're back. We really need a little sort of intro here with a bit of music or something that to kick us off. It's too naked. This
I don't know.
or maybe
As a YouTube consumer, I actually find those a little bit annoying. I don't like wading through an intro. I just want to get right to the information.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Fair enough. That's good. Let's get to it then. We're going to talk about something. Something that might be quite controversial and that some people might think is quite what's the word I'm looking for? Evil, irrationalism. So
Yay!
Yeah, you're going to be defending irrationalism, I guess, up to a point, and you're going to be telling us why irrationalism, why there might be a case for irrationalism, and then I'll be trying to push back a bit. So I suppose, I guess you and I and our people who listen to the Persuaders, we're all rational people, aren't we? When we form beliefs, we do so on the basis of good evidence and rational argument. We're not swayed by appeals to our emotions. We don't say, advertisers don't have any purchase on us, and political pundits. We make up our own minds through a careful process of reflection and weighing of the relevant evidence, and that's the right way to do it, obviously. That's right, isn't it, Pete? I mean, that's what you and I do, isn't it? And that's what we should do.
I do that when it's convenient.
Isn't it always convenient to be steered by true beliefs? And how can we be sure we have true beliefs if we don't pay attention to the evidence?
Well, the secret to being sure that you have true beliefs is to have a true belief about whether you have true beliefs. Like that. That's once you have that, well, it's easy from there. Just get a true belief about whether you have true beliefs.
Well, that may not be so easy, because that means having a good deal of self-knowledge. But what I want to have, but isn't it enough that I have processes of belief formation that are sensitive to the right kind of considerations, that are sensitive to evidence and to good arguments, deductive arguments, inductive arguments, whatever they may be? That's what I want. I don't necessarily need to reflect on all this. I just need to do it and stock my mind with knowledge. And then when my actions guided by that knowledge will generally be successful. This is what to do. Right? This is, and we any sort of dogma or mystical speculation or whatever, or just appeals to emotion, what feels right. No, you don't get to rely on those. They're not reliable guides. I mean, this is what the Enlightenment was all about, wasn't it?
The Enlightenment. I remember the Enlightenment. I'm several hundred years old, and one of the few people that remember the Enlightenment, and those were, good times. People figuring stuff out and coming to agreement on methods that seemed to bypass things like dogma and appeals to emotions. Absolutely. That was great. I remember those times. But there is a bit of a worry. There's a lot of worries. But one worry is, what are you talking about when you say, like, we should form beliefs by way of rational argument? There's two interesting words there. One is about should and rational. And one sort of worry is that what you mean by rational is just it's the way of thinking or reasoning that one should do. And if that's what you mean by rational, then the claim that we should reason rationally is the completely trivial and empty claim that we should reason the way we should. You know what you ought to do? You ought to do what you ought to do. And
Well,
you ought to think the way you ought to think. So it really, one way of stating what the point of this observation is, it's that we perhaps, if we want rationality to be some kind of like norm for reasoning, like whether it's we decide it's a norm that we want to embrace and follow, just to like for it to be a norm that we could even evaluate, we would need there to be some kind of content to describing something as being rational versus irrational. And now there's a bunch of different options that might pull in different directions. So one thing rationality might be is being consistent in the sense of consistency that you get from deductive logic. And another thing rationality might be is something like conducive to the getting of the goals of the thinker. So some kind of like practical rationality where so to summarize what I've said so far, if rationality is something like good thinking, you could raise the question of, well, what is good thinking? Is it the thinking that is consistent with deductive formal logic? That's what good thinking is? Or is good thinking that allows you to thrive, flourish, it maybe not just in the Darwinian sense of live long enough to make little baby Pete Mandix, but maybe in a broader, like an Aristotelian sense of flourishing or something like that.
Look, thinking's a very broad term. So maybe we can narrow it down to something, to an aspect of thinking, to belief formation, belief fixation.
Let's do that, belief fixation.
And there, I mean, surely there's an obvious answer. What we want are procedures that reliably generate true beliefs. Because after all, we're going to use our beliefs as a kind of map by which we steer, as Frank Ramsey, I think, put it. And we want that map to be accurate. We don't want to believe that it's perfectly safe to touch this exposed electrical wire if it's not. We want our beliefs to be true. Now, exactly how we cash that out can be a bit complicated, but that's the thing. We want true beliefs, right? And there's certain procedures for generating beliefs, like sort of testing things, doing experiments, which seem to be much more reliable than others, such as consulting what famous ancient philosophers said, which are not so reliable. So, yeah.
But is it? Do we want true beliefs, Keith? Do we? There's some true beliefs that are completely boring and useless and uninteresting. So, for example, there's possible beliefs, like, for example, the belief about exactly how many books Keith Frankish has in his office. I don't care how many books you have in your office. I don't care. And we could easily generate, we could easily imagine that there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of possible truths I could decide to put a little effort into to get to fix my beliefs about, right? Just focusing on your office and the books in your office. How many books are there? Is that number a prime number or not? How many pages are in the books?
Is there a book by Pete Mendick?
Keith, there better be.
You see, that's an important question. That's what.
I find it. Yeah, I recognize a lot of those book spines, and I think I may have even noticed some Mendick spines. But there's certain truths.
Why do you need to believe? Anyway, go on.
There's certain truths we don't care about, and maybe it would be bad to simply prioritize truth without bringing something else into it, like pertinence, right?
Okay.
But then that brings, like, if you're bringing pertinence into it, now maybe we're talking about things like, well, pertinent for what? Pertinent for flourishing or pertinent for survival. But there's another way of like pulling apart truth and desirability, right? Besides truths that we don't desire, there might be falsehoods that we do desire. Or nearby, there might be things that are indeterminate that we nonetheless desire, like, or are motivated to believe. So, shall I go on with some examples?
So look, the first point you made, we could narrow it down and say, okay, so insofar as we need a belief about a particular topic, then it's better to have a true one rather than a false one, because we don't need just to stock our minds with true beliefs just for the sake of it. But where we do need a belief, where we need a guide, if we're to a particular area, if we need we're going to sail in a particular area and we need a map of that area, then it better be a true one. But you now seem to be suggesting actually in some cases an inaccurate map might be better. It might be better than a true one, or in some cases, or at least it might be better than a blank.
I think the case is probably easier to make for an indeterminate belief versus a false belief, but I can do both.
Okay, let's start with the easy one and work up to the harder one.
So there might be certain things that it's indeterminate in the sense that no one would have any idea of how to really pin it down, whether it's true or not. Okay. So for example, is my wife the best wife? Like, okay, you're gonna have to operationalize that. You're gonna have to like formulate that into some more specificity before we could make progress on determining whether that's true or not. Maybe we could reframe it as like, is she the best for me, or is she the best overall? Or and there's so many different directions to go in, and if I seriously put any mental effort into trying to precify that claim and then gaining the evidence, right? Like, right. I would first have to suspend judgment until I did that. And when am I going to complete that project? I probably would have never got around to proposing to her or anyone else in the first place. And then if she found out I was doing that, well, that proposal is not going to go anywhere anyway. I don't think anybody would really be very interested in finding out that you were launching this full scale investigation of the billions of possible mates on Earth to figure out who's best, or to define what best consists in. There's a sense in which not just like marital relations, but all sorts of human relationships, which are desirable. One might even say good. It's good to be in friendly relations, such as the beautiful Pete and Keith relationship. And I believe that my wife is the best wife. I believe she's the best possible mate for me. I believe my kids are the best kids, and is that false? Am I believing something false? Well, it's more like I'm believing something that I don't really want to find out if it's true, and maybe no one would find out that it's true. But nonetheless, it's good to believe that. It's better than not believing it.
How about I offer you a bit of terminology here that I like, and that in the concessive space. Look, when we talk about belief, we're talking about an attitude really of treating as true. Okay? Yep. Now, we may be treating it as true because we have very good reasons to think it is true. Okay. But there could be other reasons for treating something as true. I mean, you just mentioned one. If you don't treat it as true that your partner is the ideal partner for you, then they're not going to be the ideal partner for you. By treating it as true, you help to make it true. Okay, because it's part of the structure of the relationship that you have this commitment to the specialness of your partner. And in many areas, treating something as true is essential for getting on with the job. Like, suppose a scientist is engaged in some complicated piece of research, and they're not completely sure that this research is going to lead anywhere, but it might do, but they don't really know. But in order to find out, they've really got to commit to it. And not keep doubting every day whether it's worth doing. So they commit to the idea, this is worth doing. Okay, so they accept as a premise, this is from my books on this. So they accept for the sake of this particular kind of activity that it's worth doing. And then they pursue it all within that framework. And I think a lot of the attitudes we have, and we're talking here about conscious reflective attitudes. I think attitudes that you I was going to say that you deliberately adopt. I think with qualifications I would say that you can sort of structure your thinking in certain ways by accepting certain fixed points in it, not questioning them, at least for the sake of a certain kind of inquiry. The standard example, this is a lovely book by Jonathan Cohen, An Essay on Belief and Acceptance, that I've used a lot, in which he talks about the lawyer's attitude to their, or the barrister's attitude to their client's innocence. For the sake of defending them, they accept that they're innocent. Do they actually believe it? Do they think that if they had to bet their life on it, would they bet? Probably not. Maybe they certainly wouldn't. Maybe they would bet the other way. But for the sake of defending them, they treat it as true. They take it as a premise. Now, I agree. There's all sorts of practical. Now, treating something as a premise, treating it as true is an action activity, and it can pragmatically motivate all sorts of reasons for doing it. So I'll really grant you all of that. But then there's a special class of these acceptances where it's going to be in your interest overall, only to take truths as premises. Like suppose you're dismantling a bomb or something and you need to know which connector does what thing. There's really no pragmatic considerations that could be greater than the concern for getting it right. Now, if we introduce that distinction, doesn't that sort of sweep away a lot of these worries? Because we can say, yes, of course, there are reasons for pragmatic reasons for accepting certain things. But when you're talking about belief as an purely epistemically motivated thing, then you always want it to be true. Hasn't that just cleared it all up?
Some of it, but mostly no. The thing with I'm glad you brought up the thing about the lawyer. So things like the presumption of innocence, we might say is a kind of pretense. Pretense is not quite the right word, or it's, but in the case of the lawyer, I think the way you described it is quite nice. That the lawyer, the defense attorney will say, like, I don't really want to spend time thinking about whether they're guilty or how guilty they are. I'm going to act and speak as if they're innocent, and to some degree, kind of comport myself as if they're innocent. Like, I'm pointing at my mind, by the way.
The reason is if they need to internalize it too to do an effective job.
Now, are they pretending that they're innocent? Are they thinking like, this guilty, evil son of a bitch? I'm just, I'm going to pretend that they're innocent, but
they're compartmentalizing their thinking to different contexts.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. They're compartmentalizing it, and I'm glad you brought it up so that we could set it aside, and I could say that's not the sort of thing I'm talking about. In the sort of thing I'm talking about might be illustrated with this thing that I've heard several times in several places, and maybe it's just an anecdote, or maybe there's more to it. Tightrope walkers. Tightrope walkers need to believe that they're not going to fall. And if you're a tightrope walker and you are tightrope walking and you start thinking things like, I could fall. I wonder if I'm going to fall. I think I'm probably going to fall. Right. It's not simply that you're thinking and creating a cognitive load. I'm claiming here. Again, maybe this is just anecdotal, but I think that this is highly plausible that this works out this way, that in order to not die, it really is extremely conducive to that operation that you believe that it is the case that you are going to stay on that rope. I think some degree of voluntarism is true, that there.
So do I.
It's not easy, and I think there's good reasons why it isn't easy, and maybe we could get into that. Good like evolutionary causes for it being difficult to simply just decide that there's not a bull charging at me right now. That would, if it was really just easy to solve all your problems by just willing yourself to believe that you've already solved all your problems, you would not pass that trait on in the gene pool. But so I want to say that the kind of case that I was describing with respect to like our friendship, Keith, or my marriage, is the sort of thing that it's like the tightrope walker. You don't really know. And if you start applying rationality to it, you start thinking scientifically, like, well, what really are the odds of my falling off of this tightrope? And, oh gosh, it's about 50-50. You have just now changed the odds. Now it's 70. There's a 70% chance you're going to fall. I think that's slightly, there's an important difference between the tightrope walker case, as I'm describing it, and what the lawyer is doing. Unless maybe I misinterpreted your point about the lawyer.
I think you're right. I think you're right that there are certain cases where we treat things as true, okay, which perhaps we might call belief, but which are better thought of as pragmatic acceptances. That's what I'm saying. That in the case of the lawyer, and I think that what we call belief is a subclass of those where we're seeking to accept something as true only if it is true, because the risks of getting it wrong are so great. Now, I think that I agree with you that is different from the case of the tightrope walker, because what we've got to take account of there are the effects of having the belief. This isn't about why we form it. It's about what effects having it will produce. And naturally, if you believe you're going to fall and die, that's going to have certain emotional effects that are perhaps going to make it more likely that you do. I mean, having that belief before you step onto the rope could actually be tremendously useful if you really are having a bad day and you're just and
what's the tightrope? What's the type, like, suppose your demon from the thought experiment that I'm sure everybody read, suppose your demon was talking to the tightrope walker and the demon said, look, I'm going to really punish you if you form a belief that is false. And the tightrope walker is like, well, motherfucker, I'm going to die if I, change my cognitive strategy.
The demon is a demon. They can always up it. They say, if you don't form the true belief, not only will you die, but so will all your family. So everything you've ever cared about will be obliterated. They can just up the stakes over it. Or not only will you die, you'll be tortured forever. And whatever they can do. The point about the truth demon is that they introduce a situation where it's always in your interest to have to form a true belief. They threaten to punish you or if you get it wrong in all sorts of horrible ways. And the threat is always strong enough to override whatever pragmatic reasons you might have for having a belief that's not true. So, you really, I mean, I kind of like, I'd like to try this sort of on people who believe things that seem to me, say political beliefs that seem to be obviously crazy. If your life depended on it, and no one were to know what your belief is, there was no point in pretending any longer. Would you still stick to that belief?
What you ought to believe is what would be best for you to believe. And so if the demon came along and said, like, look, you need to believe in such a way that's going to prevent you from having 1,000 subjective years of total torture, then the answer of what you should, assuming you're not into that sort of thing, then what you should believe is what whatever would lead up to that. And now you were presuming, Keith, that there is such a thing as the truth, and that I somehow have access to it, and so then I could satisfy the demon challenge by aligning with the truth.
Yeah.
But if we attach the reward and punishment to something else, besides truth, and maybe we would have to, because there's no such thing as the truth, maybe. Then you're going to get a different result of the thought experiment. For me, the interesting thing is something like the question of what ought we to believe, or how ought we to configure our minds, insofar as we have any control over that. How should we, set up the wiring? How should we comport ourselves? And so I think the demon thing is cooking the books in favor of the truth.
Well, look, he is the truth demon. Okay, so it does assume that there is coherent. That's the point. He's not the Trump is great demon who will punish you if you don't believe that. Anyway, yeah. So well, I'm assuming it's appropriate to talk about things being true and so on, and that's the thought is that that life more often than not puts us in sort of truth demon situations, and that that in general evolution has been conducted under truth demon like conditions, that the ones that know where the dangers are, that the individuals that know where the dangers are and can avoid and form correct beliefs about what will be conducive to their survival and so on, have generally done better. Now, I'm not saying in every situation it's easy to think of ones where they wouldn't, but the idea is that the truth demon has had a pretty strong guiding hand in evolution, and hence we're here. Well, maybe look, would it be good just to step back and just ask to separate out two questions? One is do we typically form beliefs by rational procedures, by the sort of procedures that I'm defending? And secondly, is it good that we do that? I mean, would we in some cases be better to do the opposite? How many of you, what proportion of your beliefs do you think have been formed by careful consideration of the evidence and argument?
I don't know. I'm tempted to say very few, but because I notice that often the case, I will find that I've adopted a view just because I've been hanging out with a certain group of people.
Yeah,
I notice other people doing that, and I'm honest enough with myself. I'm so honest with myself, Keith, that I have allowed myself to notice that, oh gosh, that happens to me too. Just like sometimes you could pick up an accent, you could pick up a worldview, and I'm, very unsure how often it is the case that I sit down and I go through the arguments, but part of the problem here is, like, how do you count beliefs, right? What you might say, like, look, if you were to really inventory all the things I believe right now, it's going to be a whole bunch of things about just like, is there a thermos in front of me right now? Is my mouse battery charged up? Do I have an iPhone or an Android? Like, there's just all these things about, like, am I wearing glasses right now? There's thousands of beliefs that I'm forming all the time. Am I walking downstairs right now or upstairs? That I'm actually incredibly good at keying into what is going on. And it's fairly rare that I have to do something like conduct a scientific experiment. I mean, sometimes, like if I'm doing a project around the house, or I'm like trying to cut a piece of wood and make sure it's the right length.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing stuff like a little bit of Pythagorean theorem, maybe measuring twice so I can cut once. But
Okay.
So it's a little bit hard to know how to.
Okay, let's try and put it.
Count these things.
Let's try and make it. Let's try and introduce a couple of distinctions. Try and get a bit better handle on this. So we're forming a lot of beliefs all the time. We just open our eyes and you believe stuff about what's around you. And this is kind of unreflective. It's courtesy of fast unconscious processes that are just keeping me, as I think you said, sort of in step with what's happening around me. And thank goodness it is. And then we have a sort of more reflective kind of belief formation where you actually consider a claim, a proposition, and make up your mind about it. So we can distinguish those two, and then rather than talking about, as you're saying, talking about quantity, trying to quantify belief is silly. But let's talk about the relative role that, let's say, rational factors play versus irrational or emotional or whatever they might want to be factors play in both in the unreflective sort of belief formation and in the more reflective sort. And it could be very different. It could be that whenever you try to think about something consciously, you take a great effort to try and focus on the evidence and so on.
By rational here, we're not going to get too into the weeds about what rationality is. Just kind
of, I don't want. Yes, I absolutely.
People basically think of as truth conduciveness, sensitivity to evidence.
Absolutely. But it may be that but similarly, when we're forming beliefs in an automatic way, it may be that these processes are sensitive to all kinds of stereotypes, prejudices, biases that we've picked up. And indeed, they're bound to be due to shortcuts, biases of some sort. Maybe not biases that are particularly bad ones, but if I'm walking around the streets here in Heraklion, I will assume that the person coming towards me will speak Greek. I've tested it. I'll just assume they do. And it's not always true because a lot of holidaymakers, but it's a reasonable bias to have.
Yeah.
So I will start speaking Greek rather than speaking Spanish, say. Okay, so that gives it So let me rephrase my question to you. To what extent do you think that what's the proportion of the relative influence of rational versus irrational, emotional, or whatever factors in your belief formation at either level, at both levels?
I honestly don't know. I'm sorry to be such a pain in the ass, but I do have a PhD in philosophy, after all. So I know you like illusions a lot, and so if we focus on a very narrow case like visual perception or beliefs based on visual perception, and if we ask the question like is vision like human like so-called normal human color vision where you not only are seeing colors, but you're seeing like shapes and distances, maybe even doing object recognition, is that generally accurate or generally inaccurate? And like you dig deep into that, and holy shit, there's all sorts of stuff about how we kind of perceive things as if through a fisheye lens. Like if you really try to capture what the geometry is of the way lines that in objective reality are parallel end up getting represented in the visual field, you get something like this bumpy sphere where it's basically like a fisheye lens or what artists might call a 5-point perspective. So you got all these different parallel lines that are warping and curving and seem to be meeting at a point. There's all sorts of stuff that I think we've talked about on the Persuaders about whether colors are distributed all the way out to the visual periphery. There's all sorts of outright illusions that we're subject to. Most normal perceivers are victim to Mueller-Lyer and Horn-Sweet illusion, all sorts of illusions about geometric properties and color properties and material properties. And it's easy to make a convex mask look concave. You just change the lighting and stuff. And so like it's just the same old counting problem again. How many true beliefs do we get in proportion to false beliefs from visual perception? Obviously, visual perception in lots and lots of contexts is better to have than to not have. No offense to blind people, but I don't think they should be driving. Right. And if I, suddenly someone put a bag over my head while I was walking down the stairs, that would really mess me up. There's all sorts of clear benefits to having vision that seems to be our biological heritage. And it's easy to tell a tale about why that has been mostly good for keeping us alive. And then when you start trying to chop that into the stuff about beliefs and truth, now you've got to do things like you're carving it into sentence-sized chunks and then asking about whether these sentences are true or not. Right. Whatever that means, corresponding to reality or accuracy. So, sorry to bring up the counting problem.
I think we can get at the issue with the as you say, that we're interested in here, the different influences on belief formation, without getting too deep into.
So one way to come at this is to take particular beliefs or particular classes of beliefs and ask, are people good at getting the rationally correct answer, or are they more likely to get some other answer? So you take, for example, beliefs about the truth values of conditionals, right? The sort of things that the Wasson card selection task is supposed to, right? Or the sorts of beliefs that you'd be probing with a Stroop test, where you're forcing someone to form a belief about what the color of a grapheme is. Or orthographic sequence is. And when the semantic content of the word doesn't match with the actual color of the ink that it's printed in, they're more likely to get the wrong answer. So there's all sorts of cases in which we could show that people kind of suck at getting the true beliefs. And some of these cases are surprising. That, oh wow, people are actually really bad at fill in the blank, remembering, remembering major features of people, right? So the change blindness kind of stuff where, the guys are carrying the mirror and then the person who's conducting the survey gets swapped out with somebody who, in some cases, they're not even the same gender or race, and the person doesn't notice. Wow, people are bad at updating their beliefs about some stuff that we are kind of surprised to find out that they're bad about. But anyway, maybe we would make further progress on just picking classes of beliefs and asking how reliable people are.
Well, okay,
relative to those, and we could say rough things like they suck or they're pretty good.
I think, there's let's take an evolutionary angle on it. It's we're equipped with sensors whose job is to kind of orient us to our environment in an effective way. All right. And of course, there's all sorts of those sensors are limiting and are limited and distorting and highly selective and so on. And the judgments that we make with them are relative to the nature of those sensors. So that we're saying that something's yellow, we're saying we're picking out a certain feature that is salient for our visual system, not necessarily one that's salient for every kind of creature. But they generally, we'd expect evolution to design those systems to do generally a pretty good job. So given the limitations, given the species relative nature of the judgment, we'd expect them to come out pretty reliably, because after all, these features are important enough for evolution to design systems to detect them, and it'd not much point in doing that and getting it wrong.
But hold on a second. You're trying to say reliable in the sense of accuracy,
in the sense of telling us that something's there when it is there, and not. Well, okay, there's going to be erring on the side of caution. Of course, is also going to be very important. But for instance, not missing something important when it's there, not missing the tiger when it's there, for example.
So
maybe yeah.
So one of the things I've got in mind in these sorts of discussions about, like, well, what the evolutionary contribution to us that is our sense organs, and whether these sense organs are best described as delivering truths. One very interesting set of considerations is one that comes from this Kathleen Aiken's paper called Sensory Systems and the Aboutness of the Mental, in which she's criticizing this very common view in philosophy of mind and also in many areas of the empirical sciences, whereby what senses are these little truth generators. They give you truths, and your immediate environment is causing them to give you truths. And she spends a lot of time looking at the neurophysiology of thermoreceptors and talking about how if you try to map the outputs of thermoreception onto temperature, which you can model temperature as varying along some linear scale, you get these very nonlinear systems of outputs. And you're going to get different nonlinear outputs depending on stuff like where are the thermoreceptors located. So, for example, the thermoreceptors in your head are going to have a very different set of response profiles than the receptor sensors that are located in other parts of your body. And there's a certain evolutionary logic to all this that maybe is just, post facto, but nonetheless, like, oh yeah, right, certain temperatures are more damaging to some tissues versus others. There's also some very subtle, interesting things like you are more susceptible to temperature-based tissue damage based on relatively rapid heating or cooling versus a slower change to the same target temperature. And part of her argument is to say that all of the various mappings that we might make between receptor response and this objective fact of the world, which is there are these temperatures that vary along a linear scale, it doesn't look like anything like accuracy.
Right. Well,
and the only way to make it look like accuracy is to do this weird mental gymnastics whereby what the receptors are really detecting is not this objective thing, which is temperature, but it's like it's temperature for me, or even worse, it's temperature as recorded by this receptor. And again, this is still her argument. That's kind of pointless to make that further leap. Really, what's happening is that you've got this thing that, in some general sense, it's caused by temperature. It's conducive to the survival of the organism by being conducive to the maintenance of its tissues because of this responsivity to temperature. But once you start talking about accuracy, you're talking about something like isomorphism between response profiles and the magnitudes in the environment, and you just don't get accuracy.
Well, I think
you get a mechanism that's reliable for staying alive, but it's not one that you could map these like semantic relations of like truth and reference and predication onto.
Again, there's a danger of getting a bit into the weeds here, but not with regard to some universal linear scale of temperature, but accuracy is still important relative to each if you like mode of temperature sensitivity. If you say that for different kinds of tissue, for example, okay, or different periods of temperature change, it's important that the system gets it right in that particular context. And it's important to have accuracy, because if your temperature regulation fails, or then you get into really serious trouble very, very quickly.
Well,
if your internal body temperature varies much from the norm, you're not going to live long. So
Keith, I'm sure you're not making this error, but I want to make sure that our audience members aren't making this error. And that is to not notice this ambiguity between right, as in some kind of like truth or semantic accuracy, right? There's one sense of right, which is that representational rightness. There's another sense of right, which is like appropriate to staying alive, or appropriate to the functioning of this machine, or something like that. And so the Aiken style argument would say like, well, these come apart, that actually the well functioning of this mechanism, which is temperature related, right? This thing inside the body is responding to this stuff outside of the body. So there's that much of a similarity to the correspondence representation relation. But aside from that, no, it doesn't look like truth at all. It looks more like a Watt governor that is able to, by having its different arm angles go up and down, it's able to regulate the speed or revolutions rate of the engine in a way that prevents the engine from overheating or blowing into pieces. But to try to come up with some mapping between arm angles and engine speed or engine health, whereby you could say one is an accurate representation of the other, that's so difficult as to seem to not be worth doing. So there's this kind of relational story. There's a thing on the inside that's like a controller or a regulator. It has to get things right in the sense of function well. And part of its functioning well is responsiveness to what's going on in the environment. But, says the anti-representationalist, and like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm becoming an anti-representationalist. I wasn't planning on that for today. The anti-representationalist says it's not truth. What you're talking about is not true.
I mean, I think
it's not accuracy.
You can kind of get those two things by relativizing this to that, so that it's,
right.
I mean, it's like, given that this is the kind of system we're dealing with, and this is the sort of range of variables that, whatever you invent some system for measuring the state.
That's what I earlier called mental gymnastics.
Well, yeah, but it's kind of right, isn't it? Because it's very important that that there actually is a certain range of I don't know, parameters, what we're talking, that you need to keep it within, and it's very important that you can put this in terms of measuring something and measuring it accurately or inaccurately. I just think that's just another way of describing the same process you're talking about there. And I think you can do it with the Watt governor too. But we're getting a little bit into the weeds, I think, because I was going to come on to something else. I was going to say, look, it seems important from an evolutionary perspective that our sensors should kind of track stuff fairly reliably. Okay, that they should be sensitive to changes in the world in a way that reflects the way the world is rather than the way that we'd like it to be. Something, that it shouldn't tell us that that's because we don't want to get too hot. It shouldn't tell us that it's not too hot. I mean, if you can see what I mean. But there seems another area where I guess the similar evolutionary considerations might point rather differently, thinking about ability and the kind of things that we often talk about, that we often think of when we talk about our beliefs, and namely that is our if you like, our beliefs about norms, about what's right to do and what's wrong to do, about what's broadly speaking moral, ethical, political, social beliefs. And in this case, and if you ask people what are your beliefs, that's often the sort of thing they'll say, or perhaps religious beliefs. And in this case, I think that there's probably a good evolutionary case for thinking that we won't tend to track. I mean, there's a question, of course, of whether there is an objective truth about these things, but there's a case for thinking that evolution wouldn't care about it if there were. That what it would care about is promoting the sort of beliefs that are going to make you fit in the group that you're living in. Because the early humans lived in fairly small groups, fairly tight-knit groups, and it was very important that you lived in a group. I mean, you couldn't survive on your own. We're social creatures. The person who's out of any group is going to die. They're not going to get food. They're not going to get shelter. They're not going to get care, and so on. You need to be in a group. And maybe sometimes people would move from one group to another. They might be kidnapped by one group or whatever. They might be expelled by one group and try and join another. But the point is, you need to fit in. And so, and these groups, each group has an identity. And the identity is partly defined by the things it believes in. I don't know, they're tribal animals, they're tribal gods, the ancestors, whatever. The norms about how you behave in the group, about who's, and it's very important that you quickly adopt those and internalize them. And the best way to follow the norms of a group is to just believe that they're right. It's instead of sort of saying, well, look, I've got to pretend that I believe in all the things that this group believes. It's much easier just to actually believe them. So if there's a sort of mechanism that quickly, if there's a brain mechanism that quickly picked up on the norms in the group you're in, and just sort of immediately sort of formed beliefs, corresponding beliefs that those things were true, then that would be very adaptive. So there's, I think, a strong case for thinking that beliefs of this kind, that truth, insofar as there's the truth about these things, wouldn't play any role at all. That what's important is utility of fitting into the group, and that could have profound implications for thinking about things like political identities today. If that's right, then there's no point in arguing rationally with your political opponents, because they are just adhering to the norms of their group and they don't want to leave that group. The best way to get them to change their minds would not be to give them evidence for the falsity of their beliefs, but to try and give them inducements to leave the group and come over to your group. And then once you did that, they just form the beliefs automatically. You wouldn't need to worry about giving them evidence.
Or maybe you could try to get them to reframe what they think of as their group.
Yeah, but it's work on group identity rather than on the norms that come with group identity. They'll pick them up straight away as soon as they've changed their identity.
Yeah.
So what do you think about
that? Well, there's quite a bit to like about it. I'm inclined to interpret this as an excellent argument against rationality.
Yes, well, I was going to go the other way, but you seem to have convinced me.
So let me temporarily shift gears in a mighty way. One way of kind of thinking about the way you and I are both coming at this is from the perspective of mind design, in the sense that instead of trying to think about like intuitively what do we mean by right and wrong, or try to get some synthetic a priori knowledge about what rationality is, let's just allow ourselves the fancy of imagining designing different kinds of minds. Okay. So we're designing animals that have to do stuff like stay alive, and maybe they're going to also have to do stuff like work well in a group, because like the whole group has to stay alive for the individuals to stay alive. We could add some other stuff in it too. And so what if there were we design the animals to reserve judgment and not form beliefs about anything until they have like put a lot of resources into collecting lots and lots of evidence, and then they form their belief. Or and compare that to like we design some minds that are just really good at not just being like the lawyer and pretending like they agree, acting like they agree with the local group, but to really just snap in automatically and believe it. And so the question then is, might it be the case that with respect to things like that we identify as like political viewpoints, that we're irrational, and in some sense it's good to be irrational. You can make it sound contradictory by saying it's rational to be irrational, but maybe we could make it not contradictory and say that, well, by rationality we mean what we earlier said is like that basic package of like being careful with respect to evidence and reasoning in a way that's roughly conforms to the kind of vanilla norms of deductive and inductive goodness. And good would be this other thing like staying alive or keeping the group alive. Would it ever be good to be irrational? And maybe is it good lots of times to be irrational? I'm going to come down on yes. I think that like there's lots and lots of such cases that it's better to be irrational. And if you continue to help yourself to this minded design kind of attitude, like suppose we wanted to like have people not start wars with each other, and we wanted people to be pro social and pro democratic and pro like sharing the decision processes. What insofar as we Keith, you and I have any control or influence over what everyone else is doing, what might be the best way to harness these facts? Well, let's try to, from the point of view of mind designers, let's also be environment designers and information designers. And so we present them, if people are going to just lock in and believe what the local group believes, maybe there's ways of kind of juicing what they perceive the group to be. We may be encouraging people to think of the human family, think of art, poetry, literature, music videos that kind of promote thinking of your community as not just the people who literally live with a few miles away, but the people that you're interacting with online, or you do the sort of thing that when you were earlier speaking about this, I was reminded of this meditation exercise from certain Buddhist meditation traditions of one way of translating it into English. It's a loving kindness exercise. And it's this sequence of meditations where you start off just like imagining the people you are closest to emotionally, the people that you find it easier to feel loving kindness toward. And for many of us, it might be a spouse or our immediate household. For other people, it won't be them at all. Maybe it's Uncle Bob is the only one you like in your family. But whoever it is, you just meditate on them and like really just focusing on that feeling, that positive feeling that you have when you think about them and you think about their well-being and what you like about them. And then maybe this, is not all happening on the same day, some other day that you're meditating. You try to get better at expanding this sphere of feeling, whereby once you really get good at sitting down and easily just igniting that feeling with regard to your immediate loved ones, now expand it out to the rest of the Frankish clan or the rest of the people in your neighborhood. And the end point of this is that you've expanded your ability to feel this feeling toward, I was going to say Donald Trump, but or other assholes. I'm sorry, that's Donald Trump's a fine person. I would never say anything negative against my president. But many of us have people for whom it's hard to like. It's hard to think well of them. that guy that just cut you off in traffic. Feel loving kindness toward them. And so what's the point of this? Well, one point of this is that it feels better. It feels better to live like this. And I think you could probably prove that it's better for your heart, and it's better for your cortisol levels, and it's better for the way you metabolize glycogen, and it's better for your sleep cycle. It's better for your blood pressure to be able to be like, this part of the human family.
Well, this
like Carl Sagan, right? Yeah. You watch like these early Carl Sagan speeches or his Cosmos television show. I would always come away with this feeling of that obviously Carl was aiming for, a feeling of like a community with the human race. It was the Soviet era back then, right? The Russians, they have children too, like that Sting song. Right. What if we could just get rid of the bombs and stop having wars, and wouldn't that be better off? And so maybe the way to get people aligned with that is to take advantage of the fact that if they think of so-and-so as part of the group, then they're more likely to have pro-social attitudes towards them. So then now let's do things to expand their view of who the group is.
Yeah, and we could, and as I think you indicated there, we could do two different sorts of things. Maybe what we could do, how do we persuade them to adopt these therapeutic practices? One thing maybe we could do is appeal to their vanity. We could say, look, really cool people are doing this. The really successful, cool people, they do this sort of thing. This kind of meditation, whatever, this kind of expansion of their sense of group consciousness, and so you should do it too if you want to be cool like them. Or we could try and appeal, make more rational appeal, citing facts that you said, such as the ones you mentioned about you'll be healthier if you do it, you'll live longer. Now, but I'm just wondering how much. Are those sorts of considerations really going to be effective?
No, absolutely not.
Because we do seem to be kind of tribal animals. We do like to have our community, and we find it very hard to sustain this kind of engagement, this identification with people who are distant from us in one way or another.
Right, and we should keep in mind that some of the opposition is not just going to come from those who are less cool and intelligent than us, Keith. But there are people that are going to resist this for reasons we can acknowledge are like those are some powerful reasons. So certain people might have certain causes, certain interests in justice. There might be certain groups that they think of as having been oppressed or having been wronged, and I could easily imagine them expressing the concern that this thing about like expanding your love and kindness is really problematic in many ways. One of them is that it's implicitly victim blaming. There's at least a danger of transmitting the message that all these people that are feeling down and oppressed, they should just like learn to love their oppressor, and they won't be so bummed out anymore. But there's also a real need for justice that this seems to be blowing off. Like there have been wrongs that need to be addressed, and simply getting people to feel good and feel good about each other isn't going to get you that justice. Now, some of the people looking for so-called justice are people looking for revenge.
Yeah,
and you and I might both agree, like, we're not so concerned about making sure they get what they want. But there are other people that maybe think of themselves as political activists or victims' rights activists who might look at this thing that I just said about love and kindness and say like, your privilege is showing. If you were obviously you've never really been oppressed. Otherwise you wouldn't be saying that feel good shit.
No, I think
you roll up your sleeves and join the fight. And it's not going to be loving and fun and stress reducing and good for your cortisol.
Yes. You see, we rapidly get into some very tricky areas here when we think about the psychology of political belief. It rapidly becomes very complex because it's what I was going to say is that you rapidly see that merely sort of focusing on evidential issues or whatever isn't necessarily going to get you going to be adequate, because what's going on is it's a kind of persuasion or ethical shaming. It's the exercise of all sorts of pulling of all kinds of emotive levers to try and get what you see as the right attitude to prevail.
Yeah, I mean, so you take a really difficult issue, like, for example, the abortion issue. And there's, one way of looking at the issue is to first off pretend that the people representing various religious points of view aren't part of the discussion. It's just the secular, scientifically informed people that are parties to the discussion. There's still going to be disagreement. And in some sense, all the evidence is in. There's no further evidence that we're going to get. And now, of course, you can't just screen off the religious people. You can't just say the only people that are allowed to have the conversation are the people that satisfy these epistemic norms of caring about evidence. There's going to be people that they think evidence includes stuff from religiously revealed truths that they've gotten from some particular set of scriptures or prophets. I mean, in some sense, they're at the table also, unless you kill them. And hopefully you don't want to do that. Now you've got to talk it out with them. And so we're in this really like wild situation that is kind of like if you are on a life raft with a group of people and some of the people are arguing that maybe the best thing to do would just to be like throw half of the people on the life raft to the sharks. And then there's someone else on the life raft saying like, we should just all kill ourselves. And then like, where do you go from there? If you've got that like wild diversity of opinion in this small crowded life raft and the clock is ticking, like there's a storm coming. There's only a certain amount of rations. You could see the sharks coming, saying like, oh, we should care about rationality or only look at the evidence is not going to do us very much good in many, many, many very real world and serious problems.
Yes, we have this problem that people form beliefs for emotive reasons, and the only way to get them to change is by using other emotive, making appeals to other emotive considerations. And so, who's to rule on which kind of emotive appeal should be the more successful one? And it's just going to come down to who's got the most power to develop their emotive appeal, who's got the best propaganda, who's got the most influential.
I also I do wonder if it's really worth trying to draw the line between the emotive and the non-emotive. I think there's lots of things we might call belief fixation that are emotion driven. And it's good that it's emotion driven. Good in the sense that it's pro-social or pro-organism. There's a set of examples that I'm aware of through Eric Kaplan's book, Does Santa Exist? And I know that he gets them from elsewhere, and I'm completely blanking on who originated these examples, but they're these very interesting cases in which rationality kind of falls apart, kind of in the same way of like the Bearden's ass case, right? If you only act in such a way that is best matches your desires to the evidence or whatever, there's certain situations like with Bearden's ass is exactly in between the two piles of hay, and it has no overriding preference for turning to the left versus turning to the right, and ends up starving to death, even though there's food literally like a foot away from it. And so the particular sorts of examples that Eric Kaplan discusses in his book and this chapter, that's kind of like this chapter against rationality. One of them is the case of forgiveness, and talking about how if you number one, you assume forgiveness is a good thing. It's good when you do something, you did something wrong, Keith, and your wife is justifiably upset at you, and you apologize, sincerely apologize. You don't give one of these shitty "I'm sorry if you're upset" apologies, a real apology, and then she forgives you. That whole practice, that's a good thing. But here's how that would just completely break down if we were all super, or enough of us were super rational about it. So I might be so rational and so like keyed into the evidence. I have clocked you, Keith. I know exactly under what conditions you will forgive me. And so I start taking advantage of you in all these situations whereby I know I'm not going to like go so far as to end the relationship. It's just within the zone, so that like I get more money, or I get higher profile invitations to other podcasts or whatever, but I just keep on taking advantage of you, knowing that you will forgive me. And then I come to you and I say, Keith, will you please forgive me? There's some sense in which that's not forgiveness. Like if I right, and similarly, like if you, Keith, you adopt a strategy of just forgiving everybody, no matter how badly they've harmed you, but you've taken on this like kind of Christian ideal of you not only turn the other cheek, you just like go ahead, shoot me in the other foot. Then people just walk all over you, because there's gonna be a Pete Mandic out there, or worse, there's gonna be some kind of sociopath that just completely screws you over. So part of the point is that in order for forgiveness to work, in the sense of there really being sincere apologizers and genuine forgiveness, you need both parties to be operating in this kind of zone of uncertainty where they aren't like perfectly matching their individual goals to an assessment of the evidence. You need something like almost willful ignorance in order to get this sort of situation. Let me just do one more example from the same book. And again, this goes back to earlier philosophers. It's this little parable of gift giving. I think it comes from a O. Henry short story. So there's like a husband and a wife, and one of them wants a certain, like a really beautiful hairbrush or something like that, and I forgot. They each want a certain kind of gift, and one of them gives up all of his stuff to get her what she really wants, and she gives up a bunch of stuff to get him what he really wants. And in so doing, they have complete the gift of the Magi. Yeah.
Alan's always, you can always
he's
rely
always
on
on
to
it.
give you the reference.
I usually don't read the comments that come in because I can't multitask.
I wish I had a hotline to him every time I need a reference.
And it's O. Henry. I bet I'm right about that. Anyway, so here's a slightly different example, also from Eric Kaplan, about gift giving. So suppose you're, celebrating, going to be celebrating some kind of gift exchange on Christmas. Notice I didn't say celebrating Christmas. You're celebrating gift exchanges. And what you and the members of your family do is you find out what everybody Yes, what I endorse what Alan just said as the accurate description. Yeah, she shaves off her hair to so he can get a nice watch, something like that. Anyway, so imagine that you go to your partner and your children, and they go to you, and everyone finds out what does everybody want. Dad, what do you want? Oh, I want an Xbox. Okay, and then you go to the store and you buy your dad an Xbox. Here you go. And then you give the kid the Ferrari that they wanted, and so everyone got what they wanted. Is that the perfect, ideal, rational situation? Well, in some sense, yes, it is, because they found out what everybody wanted, they got the evidence, and then they acted in such a way to give people what they wanted. But that's not gift giving. Gift giving can't just be that you're just shopping for each other. You placed an order, and then the delivery boy delivered it to you. That's not gift giving. But you can't go too far in the other direction of just operating in complete ignorance, right? Like, without any consideration whatsoever for what you might want or enjoy. I just get you some random crap. Like, I don't know if you like cigars at all, Keith. Here's a box of cigars. Well, what? That's not gift giving either. So it's this very strange thing where you have to really put, like, a really good gift is one that's thoughtful. It takes into consideration what you might want without knowing, like, having knowledge of what you want. It has to be informed by your preferences. It has to, in some sense, be a sacrifice on my part, maybe a sacrifice of time or of effort or just like headspace. And ideally, it's something you didn't even know you wanted, but it's just like really appropriate to. And so part of what makes gift giving work is this ability to operate in this zone of non-rationality. It's not irrational in the sense of being counter to our aims. And it's not simply pretending. It's more like a kind of this weird leap into the unknown. And like with my example of like figuring out like who really is the best spouse for me, it would be completely counterproductive to be rational. And so
yes, remember Darwin's when I'm drawing up the list of pros and cons of marriage and deciding that he would marry after he made the calculation, though I think he'd already decided what he wanted to do. But so there are all sorts of factors that play into, that guide us in these decisions. It's something you can't reduce to a calculus, and if you did try to do so, you'd omit all sorts of other interpersonal attitudes and emotional aspects and intuitive aspects that are all very relevant to, because kind of evolution has equipped us to deal pretty well generally with each other, at least with the people close to us. And we've learned to bond with each other. And I guess to some extent political affiliation is a way of bonding, and it's drawing on these deep-rooted parts of human nature, which is why I think these are what constitute human life and human interaction, and what make us able to give gifts meaningfully and so on, and to form meaningful relations with us. But it's also a weakness, because these attitudes can easily be exploited. You talked about people who are victims. Some people certainly are victims of injustice, so, but you'll find that lots and lots of people who we perhaps wouldn't consider to be victims, but rather to be beneficiaries of the present social system, will often think of themselves as victims. It's very easy to get people to feel that they're victims. You can talk it up it's very easy. It taps into something very strong. Nobody wants to be the sucker who's being taken advantage of. And that's and it's very easy to convince people that they are. It's very easy to play on these keys, on these keyboards. So this is both maybe what you're describing there, this, I don't know, sort of holistic way of relating to each other, which is sensitive to all kinds of things that we can't articulate. That's a strength, and which enables us to form bonds, but it's also a weakness that allows us to be manipulated by people who've worked out how those things or looked at some of the keys that can be pressed, the buttons that can be pressed to influence those. And we see this played out from the school playground to international politics. And I have no clue how you have some sort of framework that could mitigate this, or reduce the potential for negative effects here. I don't know how you do that, and how you'd get anyone to how you get agreement about it, even if you had a framework. But one thing you think that might work would be, say, if we're all in planetary danger, that all of humanity had to come together to deal with some planetary catastrophe, like, say, I don't know, if the climate was progressively warming at a rate that was unsustainable, then maybe people would, maybe we really need aliens to turn up with, a massive, great spaceship. And
people that have read the Watchmen graphic novel know that what we need is a giant telepathic squid to beam in from another dimension right in the middle of Manhattan and kills thousands of people. That will unite the nuclear powers against the common threat to humanity. But it's going to take a great sacrifice and someone willing to pull the trigger.
It does seem that humanity kind of learns its collective lessons only at great cost. Previous generations learned them at great cost through great suffering, and I worry that maybe we're in a situation where we will begin to rebalance things only after another crisis like those. But that's not a very happy note to end on. So let's try and. So where have we got to with all of this? We've recognized that there are all sorts of influences that are at play in informing our beliefs, and that's not always a bad thing. In fact, it's often a very good thing, but it also can be a dangerous thing. Is that a fair summary of where we've got?
I wasn't paying attention because I was thinking about what the answer to your question was, so I didn't hear the question. No, I'm sorry. That is a fair summary.
Pete, I forgive you. Don't do it too often.
I'm truly sorry.
That a certain amount of irrationalism is both inevitable and benign, but that irrationalism can also be a very it's also a great weakness of humanity, and one that can be exploited for evil. How's that?
Yeah.
Well, come on, you do it then. You summarize it. What's the moral you take from this discussion?
Well, the moral I take from it is that probably things like evidence and truth are empty norms. That we need something a little meatier. If you care about stuff like not all perishing in a nuclear apocalypse, or finding yourself in the middle of a civil war, saying like, well, it's important that we care about the truth. Let's all care about the truth. That doesn't do anything at all. Everybody that disagrees with you across the sorts of dividing lines that might be like the battle lines in an actual shooting war, they care about truth too.
Right. But this doesn't mean but
they've based things on evidence also.
It's not sufficient. I think we agree that, but I mean that's compatible with it being necessary and indeed very important that we pay attention to these things. If we just ignore evidence about, I can think of all kinds of things where scientists have proposed, people have proposed views that are both false and dangerous. I mean, surely you've got to care about correcting those.
But I mean, have you ever tried to talk to, for example, an anti-vaxxer? Or have you ever? I myself have never talked to a flat earther, but I've talked to people that have some fairly nutty, I would think, of nutty views. And further, I would view them as their views as very dangerous too. Like, it's not that we simply disagree about whether taxes should be, at this percentage or this percentage, but it's more like, should these people just be allowed to starve to death? Sorts of disagreements, right? They're gonna use the language of evidence and truth.
And sure, they're going to use it, but they're going to misuse it. There are a better way.
Well, they're going to say you're misusing it. So regardless of what you might think about the various debates surrounding the issue of trans rights, there's lots and lots of people on both sides who claim to be appealing to scientific evidence. They will say, just like, open your eyes. And I'm not going to name names of like who's on which side, but they're people saying, like, look, here's what the evidence is. Obviously, you don't care about evidence if you don't agree with me.
There are lots of real worries. I mean, we're getting into philosophy of science now, and there are lots of real worries, and the idea that different, paradigms are incommensurable and so on and so on. But heck, we do know more than we knew in the past. Science does have mechanisms for self-correction. They may grind slow in some case, but we know more about, in practically any area of science you take. We know a lot more than we did 50 years ago, and then we knew more than we did 100 years ago, and so on and so on. There has been pretty consistent progress in the sense of just knowing more about how things work. And that's manifested in our ability to manipulate things and technology, which the technology may be good or bad or whatever, but the fact that we can make it shows that we have a better grasp of how things work. Now, that's just undeniable. And if you say, okay, what is the scientific method that underpins this? What is the well, now we get into all sorts.
Well, let me take this in a slightly different direction. So you've heard of Nick Bostrom, right?
Yeah.
And Nick Bostrom takes seriously that maybe what we should do once we have the technology in place to do it is we scan everybody's brains in real time and to find out anyone that has like terrorist inclinations, not in some particular political sense of terrorist, but like in the just kind of the broad movie villain sense of who's planning on killing a bunch of people. And we basically do a kind of like a Minority Report thought crime thing, right? So this would involve a massive violation of privacy and self-determination, and arguably would create a better outcome in the sense that reducing crime, reducing suffering. There's all sorts of things that you can measure and give it argument that you could say is a scientific argument, and it's not simply because you're fiddling with the philosophy of science or the epistemology of what counts as evidence. It's more that you have made certain decisions about what your values are.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Decisions that, in some sense, are more like the case of the gift or the forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's I don't want to say it's irrational. It's more like non-rational or irrational or something like that. It's kind of more like an aesthetic judgment, except it's like a life and death one, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are going to be very unhappy if we go this way versus that way.
This is important, but also very dangerous, because look, yes, all science is value laden. It's all to do with what you choose to focus on, and what motives are for studying this thing, and what. Of course it is. And these points are all important, and philosophers of science have made them. And yes, but there's a baby here as well as the bathwater, and anti-vaxxers are just throwing both out, and there's a danger that in emphasizing these points about all the sort of if you like, non-evidential concerns, or however we want to phrase this, that feed into science, that the economics, the moral, social, political dimensions to scientific inquiry. We license people to just say, well, if I can find a scientist who says this, then that's good enough. That will do.
Right. I mean, so
we don't want to go down get into that sort of relativism, and the fact that it's impossible to draw a sharp line doesn't mean that we can't still make discriminations here, and we must make discriminations. It's very, very important.
I have enough of an agreement with you about a lot of these issues whereby I don't want to, I'm not saying that we have to respect the anti-vaxxers or the flat earthers definition of what evidence is or what they think good research methodology is. So this is an argument that I presume my audience would agree with me on what counts as doing science. Mm-hmm. But there are still problems in the vicinity with respect to what's the policy that comes out of this? So for example, part of the problem, I assume my audience will agree with, maybe not the audience of this video, but the person on the other side of the screen will agree that the more anti-vaxxers there are, the worse. And probably the solution will have something to do with education policy. It will have something to do with what the curriculum is in public education and something to do with funding public education, right? But now you're going to be trying to affect policy change in a democratic situation where the anti-vaxxers get to vote. And so you might also want to not be paternalistic or authoritarian and just say, well, maybe we shouldn't let them vote. Only college educated people should vote. So there are these very difficult problems about how to get the epistemology and the politics all in line so that we can solve this problem without just killing them. Right?
By not we're not keeping a fairly robust, even if ultimately indefensible distinction between rational belief formation and irrational belief formation. You're making it harder for you to do that, because they will say, when you start pumping resources into education about vaccines and so on, they will say, you're just brainwashing people.
Yes,
propaganda.
That is what they'll say.
And if you buy this idea that there's, I don't know, sort of like fire event idea that anything goes, then you've no justification for doing that. You can't defend it. You can just say, well, we're just pushing the view that we like.
Right. But
but you want to say something better than that. You want to say, no, we're not just pushing the view we like. We're pushing the truth, or at least the view that has got the massive evidence behind it.
I agree with the fire ovens that there's some sense in which just saying oh, no, we're not just pushing values. We're pushing the right values. We're pushing the valuable values. And your values, you guys, you have shitty values. We've got the good ones. No, that's just empty.
No, it's not about pushing. The point is this: the truth is a value that everyone should want to cleave to. That's the point.
But everyone already does, Keith.
Well, they don't. Well, okay. Then that's how we push them. We don't say, look, this is what the liberals think is good science, so we're going to push it on. We're saying, no, this is what is good science. It's not. We don't think this is good science because we're liberals. We would think this was good science, whatever our political views are, because it is good science. You've got to hold on to that core Enlightenment idea that there is a way of resolving these issues of value difference in some cases by simple appeal to the facts that vaccines do work and are generally safe. It's not that's. You've got to cut the ground from under yourself and not allow.
Isn't it a fact that Jesus died for your sins? Isn't it a fact that there's just two genders?
No,
right?
no,
There's all sorts of facts that are contested, and simply saying we have to care about the facts doesn't
but we
cut any
have
ice.
methods. But in cases like vaccines, we have methods for answering those questions. Methods that, when they're properly understood, everyone should say, "Yeah, that makes sense." We do controlled trials, we do these sort of things. Everyone should be able to agree that that's a good way of deciding these questions. There isn't a good way of deciding the question about Jesus or whatever about genders. Those are matters of social consensus and whatever.
But if you take a look at the way things shaked out, during the peak of the COVID pandemic, and you had different areas in the world where people were wrestling about, should everyone stay home from school? Should there be mandatory masking? What are the obligations and requirements for getting through this situation? And some people were saying, like, look, what matters is we keep the greatest number of people alive, or we protect vulnerable populations, we reduce the illness and this and that and the other thing. In some sense, all parties to the debate didn't want to die. And saying, like, look, you have to care about keeping people alive. Everyone's going to say, yes, that's right. We care about that.
Right.
But now, should there be a law mandating mask wearing, or should people stay home from school?
That's a question to be addressed, democratically by society, but it should be informed by knowledge of whether mask wearing alters the risk of infection and the spreading of the thing, and how and consider about how dangerous the disease is, what the mortality rate is, what resources. There's a load of facts that have got to inform this debate, and we can't just we're just cutting the ground from under ourselves if we say that all of this is informed by value judgments. I mean, maybe it is in some sense, but the point is that if we can't agree on, I mean, what's the scientific method? Okay, it's difficult, but if we can't have a broad agreement that this way of investigating is likely to give us a better basis on which to make decisions, a better set of premises on which to make decisions, which are themselves ultimately informed by our values, of course. If we can't agree on that, then we're just doomed, frankly.
Right.
And we have to have points of trust. And maybe it doesn't have to be the whole sort of Enlightenment package, but it has to be the idea that, look, whether you're a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, you can agree on certain things, like about whether how contagious this disease is, how effective masking is at preventing its spread, about what, and you should be able to agree on that whether you're a Republican, Democrat, communist, capitalist, whatever, because it isn't these facts are not in a way sensitive to those particular social.
So here's how I think of it, and I don't know if you're going to like this or not going to like this. So the way I think of it is, if I were the emperor of the universe, what we would do is we would try to all stay alive and happy and solve problems through talking, and not through just wiping out people that disagree with us. That's what I would like. Yes. Now, what happens when there are like members in the disagreement that don't just have disagreements about, like, what the rate of infection is, or what's the mass of this, what's the porousness of that? They disagree about whether you should try to solve problems by talking, or they disagree about whether we should try to keep the greatest number alive and all be happy. If they disagree with something that basic, what do you do about it? I say it is no help at all to tell myself, well, at least I have the true views, at least I have the good values. I have to, like, dig deeper and ask myself questions like, can I live with myself if I kill those people? Because maybe I won't live if I don't. Maybe there's going to be certain situations in which they completely take advantage of me. Completely take advantage of me. Like, I don't survive that. And so the main thing I can change are what my own values are. Yes, I ideally would like us to solve problems by talking. and not by shooting. And I would like us to all be happy. I have no desire for vengeance. But if it seems like I'm going to get completely wiped out, or my family is or my family is going to get completely wiped out, well, then I guess we need more than talking. And I'm not going to adopt a value that says always turn the other cheek or always get shot in the other foot. There's going to be certain cases where I say, okay, the gloves are off. It's not rational now because you're not interested in talking. And so, now others might say, no, you should always just be willing to do the right thing, which means like you lay down your life. And I say, well, like, yeah, everyone who's thought that in the past has gone extinct. I don't feel like going extinct, so I'm not going to go that way. So part of what I just said was a brief in favor of rationality, but there's another way of hearing it is just at bottom, it's fire oven. Anything goes. And what I bring to it is what I want. And what I want is for everyone to be roughly kind of liberal and enlightened and value things like talking and doing math. And if there's someone else that doesn't want that to the point where it would result in me getting wiped out, then I guess it's a war.
Sure, if you get into that,
yes, it's a war.
If you get into that stark position where there's just an irreconcilable clash of values, and it's the stakes are incredibly high, then yeah, sure. Then we've kind of the sort of the Enlightenment project has just completely broken down, and yeah, okay. But I'm just again, baby in bathwater. I cling on to the hope that we can do something to build bridges through focusing on
me too.
How things actually work in the world and what are the consequences. It's helpful to know. Look, if you have a debate about vaccines, it's really helpful to know what will happen if your children have the vaccine. Insofar and now
I
some
agree
people
with that.
and we can make predictions. Now we can't make absolutely.
If I identify certain conversants in this big human discussion as being sociopaths or psychopaths, or the sort of people that just will never be talked out of doing horrible evil, if I encounter them, I'm going to not simply soothe myself with, well, at least I have the right values. I'm going to think about in the best scientific, effective way possible how to defend myself from them,
and that
how to terminate them with extreme prejudice.
Well, but wait a minute. But what one thing you can do is you can educate them about, without going to those extremes yet. You can try.
Sure. Like I said, I value talking.
But then
I value the talking
not
solution.
just talking, but actually demonstrating why this prediction is better than that prediction. And you can actually run experiments and get them to see the results, and just show them how the science works. And it's not the case that anything goes. But was wrong about that. It's not the case that the anti-vax science is as good, it goes just as well as the other science. No, there's a massive evidence, over many over 2 centuries of evidence.
If they're interested in talking and evaluating evidence, I'm glad about that, and we'll engage with them on that.
Right. So some scientific methods, some methods that people might describe as scientific or methods of inquiry, are better than others. Now it's very hard to pin down exactly what those methods exactly, but we just know that some work better than others, and we know which they are. And there's no point.
But of course, some work better than others. Like even if it was just random, there were no laws of nature, there would still be some things that work better than others.
Yeah, so fire evidence is wrong. It's not the case that anything goes. It may have been the case historically that all sorts of different factors fed into the way that science developed. But still, there's a testing against reality is the basic principle, and it works.
Look, I'm not against reality. And I do like doing things that works, but I think all the interesting stuff is not touched by that agreement.
Well, here's the point. Okay, look, maybe all the philosophically interesting stuff isn't touched by it. I agree. There's a load of philosophically interesting stuff.
But policy interesting stuff. There's even I think there's still maybe this is philosophical, maybe not, but there's things about policy like public policy and just political issues. Like how do you campaign for this? How do you have an effective strategy for convincing people of this in a way that is...
my worry is that some of the sort of the relativism and the irrationalist aspects of philosophy can be seen as feeding this kind of anti-enlightenment attitude that, you know, we're seeing in the US Department of Health, for example. And insofar as it is, we should be cautious about it. And
I don't think the US Department of Health read Derrida, and that's why they're fucked up.
No, but
I don't think we can blame any so-called irrationalists or anti-rationalists for them. And besides, I'm way better than Derrida because I like logic and stuff.
Yeah, that's probably a fair comeback, but it could at least be seen as providing some sort of you know, philosophical legitimation for stuff that's being pursued for quite other reasons. I agree that there's philosophically interesting stuff here that I'm avoiding in what I said. Well, yes. Shall we try and wrap this up on some? I had to go a while back, but I think you missed. So I'll let you wrap it up.
I'm governed. Not only do I have my rational organ up here, which is the brain, but I have a very full bladder. So we've got
that's 2 minutes. Very good reason for forming the belief that we need to finish. So wrap it up for us, Pete. What have we learned over the course of the last nearly 2 hours of persuasion?
So I think that we have learned that one should forgive and appreciate that much of life is the aspects of life that we access through our like sensitivity and our desire to have a friendship, and maybe there's no good argument for why you should be friends. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to have friends, and it would be nice if we all didn't kill each other, and used reality to help us do that. I think those are things that we've learned.
Or at least reminded ourselves of. Yes, I think I can agree with all of that, and I think we can both agree that we don't agree with Mr. Gradgrind from Dickens' Hard Times, who said facts are all that important. Teach these children nothing but facts.
Big disagree.
That effect. And of course, Dickens' point was that he was just missing everything, really. Okay, Pete. I think we have persuaded. We've done persuading for this time. I'm not sure who's persuaded who. You persuaded me of some things anyway.
Yeah, I hope I've persuaded you that you're not going to fall off the tightrope.
Oh gosh, yes, I'd forgotten my tightrope walking tomorrow.
You're not going to fall.
Thank you. Yes, I will believe that I can do it, and I will believe that I can do all the things.
I believe in you. I know you.
I believe in you too, Pete. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. So,
all right. Likewise.
For everyone who's listened. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.